El IICA le da la bienvenida a este evento y agradece su participación. Estas son algunas recomendaciones para mejorar la calidad de la videoconferencia. Habilite su micrófono solo en el momento que le den la palabra. Es importante mantenerlo en silencio cuando otra persona está hablando. Por favor, tener encendida la cámara en todo momento para que otras personas lo puedan ver. Si necesita atender algo personal, puede apagarla y encenderla al volver. Agradecemos por favor poner en silencio sus teléfonos celulares para evitar alguna interrupción en la videoconferencia. Recomendamos cuide su postura y su posición frente al computador. Para esta reunión contaremos con interpretación simultánea. Es muy importante que cuando ingrese al enlace de Zoom del idioma de su preferencia, debe hablar en ese idioma. Por ejemplo, si ingreso al enlace de español, debe hablar en español en todo momento. Al finalizar el video, les pedimos el favor de hacer silencio durante 30 segundos. Una vez finalizado ese tiempo, el moderador o conductor puede iniciar la reunión. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Morning, everyone. My name is Jean-Charles Levalet. I'm the country representative for IICA at the Canadian office here in Ottawa, snowy Ottawa, cold morning. I welcome everyone. Just for housekeeping, if you haven't chosen yet, in Zoom at the bottom right, there is an interpretation body. It looks like a globe. You can select English or Spanish, and you can maintain that selection throughout the entire webinar. I did want to mention quickly a few words about food recalls. And so a food recall is the removal of food or from sale or use. It may be an issue about the label. There's an issue in the supply chain. The idea, it's a risk mitigation action, basically. So it's the responsibility, at least in Canada, of the industry to remove the recalled food from the supply chain. And our partner today, our co-host, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, their role is more vast. They inform the public, they oversee the implementation of recalls, they verify that the industry has removed the recalled food from the supply chain. In Canada, like in terms of incidents, I've got this question a lot. How many incidents are there in terms of recalls in this country? And I would say generally at least 175 a year, and depending on the level, sometimes over 300. But most recalls in this country are voluntary, so that they're conducted by the industry, by the food business itself. And you may have more risks on, say, meat products, or it could be a leafy green or a cheese. And so the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, provides oversight. And so it can happen where the business is unable, or even refuses, I don't think I've ever seen it, but to conduct a voluntary food recall. So the Minister of Health in this country, in Canada, has the power basically to order a mandatory recall. So I expect we'll learn more about all this with our partners, the CFIA, and I'm going to shift now from IICA to CFIA and Marie-Pierre Mignot, who will help us moderate today's session. Marie-Pierre, over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Charles, and thank you for those opening remarks, very on point on food recalls. So I would like to say good morning and welcome to this workshop to introduce the Canadian Food Safety Investigation and Recall process. So my name is Marie-Pierre Mignot. I'm the National Manager of the Technical Cooperation Unit within the International Affairs branch of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA. So my group is in charge of coordinating technical assistance activities that fall under the CFIA's mandate, which covers animal health, plant health, and of course, food safety. So in today's workshop, our CFIA expert, Janice Fleming and Adrienne Kong, will provide us with an overview of CFIA's food safety recall process including also some information about CFIA's mandate and regulatory authority, as well as the guiding principles and essential steps of a food safety investigation. So I am extremely pleased of the collaborative work between IICA and CFIA that led to this workshop being broadcasted to various countries today. And I hope that the information that we are about to share will be of use. And there will be also a questions and answer period after the CFIA expert presentation. So please do not hesitate to ask for any clarification on anything that you have been shown today. This is also a good opportunity for you to learn for exporters considering Canada as an export market as we are sharing this information. And once again, I sincerely hope you will find this information that we're about to share very useful. So without any further delay, I would now like to let Ms. Janice Fleming. Janice is Senior Operational Advisor with the Office of Food Safety and Recall. So Janice, the floor is yours for your presentation. I will share.
Thank you, Marie-Pierre. Hello and welcome to all our colleagues in the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. It's an honor to present to you today an overview of Canada's food safety investigation and recall process. Next. Can switch. Next. Thank you. As mentioned in the introductions, my name is Janice Fleming from the CFIA, and I will be your presenter today for Module 1. So in Module 1, we will review the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's mandate with respect to food safety, as well as some of the related regulatory requirements under the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. We'll also look at the role of the Office of Food Safety and Recall, the guiding principles of a food safety investigation, information regarding food safety hazards, and then we'll take a look at Canada's food safety investigation and recall process in more detail. In Module 1, we'll be starting with the first two steps, which include the triggers and food safety investigation, which will include details around the goals of a food safety investigation, the scope, as well as the role of sampling and testing. As a science-based regulator, the CFIA helps protect Canadians from preventable food safety hazards. And this is done through the development and implementation of food safety regulations, guidelines, and policies for both domestic and imported foods. It's also by verifying through inspection activities that industry is meeting food safety requirements, as well as through CFIA compliance and enforcement actions conducted to correct any noted deficiencies. So Safe Food for Canadian regulations introduce new licensing, preventive control, and traceability requirements for food businesses that either import food, prepare food for export, or prepare food to be sent across provincial or territorial boundaries within Canada. The next few slides, we will focus on Safe Food for Canadian regulation requirements specifically for preventive controls related to investigation, notification, complaints, and recall, as well as traceability requirements. So Part 4, Division 5 of the Safe Food for Canadian regulation deals with investigation, notification, complaints, and recall. The investigation, notification, and mitigation of risk section indicates that operators are required to initiate an investigation when the food might present a risk of injury to human health or does not meet regulatory requirements. If their investigation establishes that there is a risk of injury to human health, the operator must immediately notify the CFIA and take action to mitigate the risk. The complaint section requires that an operator must have a documented procedure for receiving, investigating, and responding to food complaints. Details of the complaint The results of their investigation and the actions taken are required to be documented and kept for a minimum of 2 years. An operator must also have a documented recall procedure that enables the effective recall of a food. Recall, implementation, and notification are also required if a food is the subject of a recall. And in this section, it requires the operator to immediately notify the CFIA, immediately implement their recall procedure, and document the details of the recall, including information that demonstrate it was effective. And finally, under the recall simulation section, an operator is required to conduct a recall simulation every 12 months and document how that recall simulation was conducted, and also keep records of these activities, also for a minimum of 2 years. So Part 5 traceability in the regulations sets out requirements for traceability and requires that certain food businesses track the movement of their food in the supply chain forward to the immediate customer and then also back to the immediate supplier. Traceability documents are used to identify where the food is sourced from, or one step back, and to whom the food is provided, or one step forward. Preparing and retaining traceability documents will assist the operator to accurately identify where their food products have been sourced from, as well as where they have been distributed to, which will in turn aid in determining the scope of a recall and thereby ensuring that consumers are protected. And we'll go through, these are the requirements, we'll go through how that's done in later slides. In section 5, the last part of the regulation information, section 5, dealing with traceability, it also includes provisions specifically related to documentation. So among the other things that the operators are required under this section, they are also required to retain documents related to the distribution of food for a period of at least 2 years. They must ensure that these documents are accessible within Canada, either on-site or off-site, but in such a way that they're easily accessed. They must be able to produce these documents upon request, meaning within 24 hours of the CFIA making such a request. And finally, they must ensure that labeling information for the food is provided along with the food, including a lot code or a unique identifier. So now that you have an idea of the requirements for food industry in Canada under the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, specifically related to investigation, notification, complaints, and recall, we're going to now take a closer look at CFIA's role in managing food safety incidents. So there are a number of partners that work together with the goal of ensuring safe food for Canadians. And in this slide, you can see the CFIA, or Canadian Food Inspection Agency, has responsibility for regulatory compliance and enforcement related to food. They are responsible for conducting food safety investigations and risk assessments, as well as issuing recall warnings and conducting recall effectiveness checks. The Public Health Agency of Canada, or FAC, has responsibility for monitoring outbreaks and interventions, investigations related to human health, conducting laboratory testing, and coordination and communication of information. Health Canada is responsibility for developing health policies and standards related to food and conducts health risk assessments upon the request of the CFIA. And then finally, for other government department partners, municipal, provincial, and territorial agencies have primary responsibility for healthcare, monitoring, outbreaks, and interventions. And all of these different government departments work together with industry, who has responsibility for implementing food safety controls, conducting investigations, initiating and responding to food recalls. And last but not least, we have our international partners, such as yourselves, who we involve with information exchange, particularly when a product has left the country or been exported. So part of the CFA's food safety mandate involves the management of food safety incidents. So this may be required when there is a reason to believe that a food is potentially unsafe, and the CFIA will act as quickly as possible in order to collect any required information, request a health risk assessment from Health Canada if one is required, and to make risk management decisions in order to mitigate risk associated with the affected food. Specifically, the Office of Food Safety and Recall within the CFIA has responsible for the national coordination of food safety investigations and recalls, and they do this by liaising with the CFIA Inspectorate across Canada. They ensure the consistency of decision-making related to recalls and food safety investigations. They are the primary contact with the Public Health Agency of Canada during foodborne illness outbreak investigations. They are the single contact point with Health Canada for incident-specific health risk assessments when one is required. And they are the single contact point with international food emergency offices and all international food safety authority network contact points, or InfoSan contact points. So now we will get into a little further details related to food safety investigations. So CFIA's 7 guiding principles for a food safety investigation are here on the screen. So timeliness, we use that to ensure that food safety incidents are promptly investigated. Appropriateness, which ensures that the depth of the food safety investigation is appropriate to the hazard and the likelihood of occurrence. Consistency, meaning that the procedures are consistent with internal policies, procedures, guidelines, and standards. Thoroughness, including that all affected or potentially affected product is identified. Accuracy, meaning that information collected should be accurate and concise. Partnership or collaboration and cooperation amongst stakeholders. And finally, transparency or sharing of pertinent information to ensure stakeholders are informed and able to fulfill their responsibilities. So these are some examples of the types of food safety hazards for which food safety investigations are undertaken. So food safety hazards that may result in a recall include microbiological hazards, examples such as Listeria monocytogenes, E. coli 0157H7, Salmonella. Chemical hazards, including things such as patchoulin, lead, or agricultural chemicals. Food allergens, nuts, eggs, milk, or mustard, among others. And then physical or extraneous material, including fragments of glass, wood, or metal. And then finally, nutritional hazards, which could be excessive or deficient levels of vitamin or mineral addition. So the food safety investigation and recall process and its 5 steps are shown here on this slide. It's a highly integrated process, which includes interactions with many partners, some of which we mentioned earlier, and who may be involved at various stages during the process. It consists of 5 main steps that you can see here that we will look at in turn throughout the remainder of the presentation. So the first 2 steps, triggers and the food safety investigation, we will cover in the remaining of module 1. And then the final 3 steps, the health risk assessment, the recall process, and the follow-up, Adrian will cover in module 2. So the first step of the food safety investigation and recall process is a trigger. which initiates the entire process. The trigger can be any specific source of information that suggests a potential food safety risk exists, and which prompts the Canadian Food Inspection Agency staff to initiate a food safety investigation. So here we can see some examples of triggers, which includes consumer or industry complaints, foodborne illness outbreaks, notification of a food safety issue directly from a company or a regulated party, a CFIA audit or inspection results, positive laboratory findings from CFIA sampling or from other sources, referrals from other federal, provincial, or municipal governments within Canada, as well as referrals from foreign governments. Some other triggers that we may see are results from the regulated parties sampling or testing, other government department sampling results. We may get inquiries or from media or either traditional or social media sources, as well as we would respond to inquiries really from any source that is directed towards the CFIA. Okay, so when the trigger indicates that there may be a risk associated with a food product, food safety investigation will be initiated. So the food safety investigation, or step 2 of the process, it's maybe complex and involves several essential activities in order to determine if a food recall or other possible corrective measures are required. When dealing with potentially unsafe food, the CFIA acts quickly as possible to collect relevant information and make decisions to mitigate that risk. So the goals of a food safety investigation are to determine whether a food safety hazard exists and to assess the nature and extent of the issue. This includes identifying the product or products affected, as well as the regulated parties involved. And this may include retailers, manufacturers, importers, and/or distributors. Food safety investigations involve many activities in order to collect the necessary information that may be required for a health risk assessment. It may include things such as determining the time frame of the issue, or when the issue started and when it ended, determining the frequency, meaning did the issue happen only one time? Was it a continuous problem? Or is it something that happened intermittently? As well as identifying the cause, or deviation that resulted in the incident. The food safety investigations are conducted in a timely, thorough, consistent manner and to the level appropriate to the potential risk. They provide information that allows us to take the appropriate actions in order to minimize potential risk to consumers. And on average, the CFIA conducts approximately 3,500 food safety investigations per year, resulting in approximately 300 recalls on average. So causes of food safety incidents can be found at any point along the food production chain. All of the players noted on this slide have a role to play in ensuring the safety of food, from the primary producer to the food processor, the distributor, retailer, or restaurant, as well as a consumer during home preparation. Some common causes of food safety incidents may include things such as poor hygiene, improper food handling, preparation or storage, incomplete cooking. Oh, you can go back one slide. Thanks. Incomplete cooking, production errors, cross-contamination, or improper or lack of refrigeration, just to name a few. Now you can switch. Thank you. When conducting food safety investigations, we gather all the available details of the food involved, including things which you can see here in the gray box to the right of the screen. Include things such as a brand name, common name, production code or product code, UPC or Universal Product Code, a copy of the label or packaging, the date and location of purchase, among other things. Once we have the details for the food product involved, we will then follow the food through the distribution chain by tracing back and or tracing forward. So when we trace back, we trace the food product from the consumer to its origin, and we do this in order to identify the supplier of the product. This is done in a very precise way, step by step, through the distribution, working through the distribution chain by identifying which accounts purchased or received the product. And then we may also trace back in order to determine where in the food chain the problem occurred, or the root source or the root cause, which may be at any of the different levels on the last slide, the consumer, the retail, warehouse, or manufacturing level. When we trace forward, we trace the product from its origin, such as a manufacturer or importer, to the point of sale or to the consumer. This is often done after the initial recall to determine if any of the receiving clients have repackaged or offered the product for sale under a different brand name or incorporated the product into another food product. Trace forward may also be done if we're looking to obtain samples of a product under investigation that's already in the marketplace. So once potentially harmful food is traced back to a production or processing facility or to an importer, the CFIA inspectors may visit the site to gather further information for the food safety investigation. On-site activities at the manufacturing level may include observation and inspection of processing or production practices and procedures, observing or inspecting equipment and conditions, as well as a review of production and distribution records. CFIA inspectors also review the accuracy and completeness of information provided by the company. They may collect food samples for laboratory testing when the need is identified, and they will use this information gathered in order to help determine if any other products may be affected. And we'll look at sampling and the scope of the incident in more detail in a moment. Companies are encouraged to share with the CFIA any information they feel is pertinent to the investigation, and this may then be included in assessing the risk of the issue. So basic information that's required for all food safety investigations include the product, either the name of the product, the format in which it's sold, the code, production code on the product, best before date or expiry date, and packaging, copies of packaging. A company name, the type of company, whether it's an importer or manufacturer, complaint records, and the return policy. Production information is very important. It includes things such as quantities of product produced, the lot code applied and how it's deciphered or what it means, the production date or dates, definition of a lot, and processing information. Distribution, including quantities distributed, area of distribution, was it national or provincial or exported, and different types of clients. Complaint details, if the trigger for the incident was a complaint, will be gathered, and then finally any reported reaction, illness, or injury is also taken into consideration. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Part of the food safety investigation is also to determine the scope of the incident, meaning determining if any other products are affected. So this may include other codes of the same product or product packaged in different size packaging or under different brand names. It could be other products which may have been produced with similar inputs, produced under similar conditions or using the same process, And then it also could include other processes conducted within the same facility. And it could also include other operators who may have used the same affected inputs or received the affected product. So key factors which are considered include the nature of the hazard, as we discussed earlier, meaning microbiological, chemical, physical, or nutritional hazards. The potential root cause. Examples of potential root causes could be things such as listeria in the manufacturing environment, E. coli 0157H7 from meat inputs, labeling errors, production errors such as inadequate cooking, just to mention a few. The focus of the food safety investigation may include inspection or review of processes and practices, documentation, trace back and trace forward activities, as we mentioned in a previous slide, as well as enhanced sampling and laboratory results. So as noted earlier, sampling or testing is another important activity we may conduct during a food safety investigation. So you may ask, why does the CFIA test during a food safety investigation? Well, sampling and testing is an important activity, and it's is often conducted to confirm if a hazard exists in a food product, also to determine the extent of the hazard. Is it in different lot number, in different lots, or just one? In order to support documented evidence that was found during on-site inspection activities. And they may also be used to provide information for use during a health risk assessment, or they may be taken to assist in identifying the root cause of the incidents. Documentation such as production records and knowledge of the process are used to determine which lot codes or products are of interest for sampling. Sampling may be done at the manufacturer importer level, or really at any point in the distribution chain, such as a retailer, or even at the consumer level. And then how is sampling conducted? Well, samples may be of food products themselves. They may be taken for food contact surfaces, or they may be environmental samples. And a methodology and sample size are selected as part of the sampling plan that will be established for each incident. Okay, so this brings us to the end of Module 1, and I will thank you for your attention, and I will now pass the presentation over to Adrian Kong, who will take you through Module 2, focusing on steps 3 to 5 of the food safety investigation and recall process.
Thank you, Janice. That was an excellent presentation. We're now going to move on to Module 2, in which we will focus on steps 3 to 5. So, just a second. Okay. So in Module 2, we'll take a look at the recall process in more detail, including the definition of a food recall, risk management decisions, recall depth and class, recall implementation, communication, as well as verification and follow-up. Next slide, please. Thank you. As shown in Module 1, this is an overview of the Canadian food safety investigation and recall process. So we've already discussed the first 2 steps, triggers, and the food safety investigation. In Module 2, we will focus on the last 3 steps, health risk assessment process, the recall process, where the Office of Food Safety and Recall at the CFIA is responsible for making the risk mitigation decisions, and as well, we'll talk about follow-up. Next slide. Step 3 of the food safety investigation and recall process is the health risk assessment. A health risk assessment is a scientifically based process which determines the likelihood that a specific adverse effect will occur in an individual or a population following exposure to a hazardous agent. Next slide, please. Determining the health risk associated with a food is a key step in the CFIA's risk mitigation decision. A technical risk assessment, or TRA, is conducted within the CFIA by the OVSR using a science-based process, which determines the risk associated with a food based on existing Health Canada guidelines, policies, standards, or previous health risk assessments conducted by Health Canada. In other situations, a health risk assessment may actually be sought from Health Canada directly. Decisions consider actions already taken by the company and also take into consideration other factors, such as past decisions, if the food is aimed at a vulnerable population, the public perception of risk, the distribution of the product, and the availability of the food in consumers' homes. Most recalls are conducted voluntarily by the industry upon request by the CFIA. Other risk mitigation options that are open to the CFIA that can be used at any time, with or without a recall, can include things such as a border lookout, seizure or detention, license suspension, prosecution, destruction, increased sampling or audit frequency, or a warning letter. The health risk assessment. So if a potential health risk has been identified, a formal request for an HRA may be submitted to Health Canada by the CFIA. The purpose is to determine the level of health risk a specific food product represents to the Canadian population. The Food Directorate at Health Canada provides HRAs according to established protocols and time standards. The HRA will guide the CFIA's risk management response. Next slide, please. Determining whether to request a recall is step 4 in the food safety investigation recall process. So when a food is assessed as representing a health risk, the next step is to determine whether risk mitigation actions are necessary and which ones will be the most appropriate. This determination is based on the risk classification and other relevant factors. One possible risk mitigation action is to request a food recall. Next slide. Recall is defined in Canada as the removal of a food from further sale or use, or the correction of its label at any point in the supply chain as a risk mitigation action. The OVSR classifies recalls as either Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 relative to the health risks posed by the product. We'll look at this in a bit more detail shortly. A voluntary recall is a recall that is initiated and carried out by the recalling firm without ministerial order. A mandatory recall is a recall as per Section 19 of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency Act. Next slide. So the regulatory basis for a mandatory recall is found in Section 19 of the CFIA Act. And it states where the minister believes on reasonable grounds that product regulated under an act or provision that the agency enforces or administers by virtue of Section 11 poses a risk to public, animal, or plant health, the minister may, by notice or distributing the recall mandatory order that the product be recalled or sent to a place designated by the minister. It includes all products under CFIA jurisdiction. And generally in Canada, a mandatory recall is an instrument of last resort after health risk has been established and the company has been requested to do a recall. A mandatory recall order is a risk management option which can be implemented when the recalling firm is not willing or perhaps not able to recall a product that is considered to pose a risk to public, animal, or plant health. To put this particular recall tool into perspective, it has only been necessary to conduct 7 mandatory recalls since the creation of the agency in 1997, with the last one occurring in April 2004. Next slide. So this table demonstrates the 3 recall classes and their corresponding impact on the population and whether a public warning is issued or not. So Class 1, the situation where serious adverse health consequences can occur and possibly be even fatal. Usually a public warning is issued. Class 2 is a situation where temporary adverse health consequences or probability of serious adverse health consequences is remote. A public warning may be issued. And Class 3 is a situation where it's not likely to cause any adverse health consequences and usually is used for addressing regulatory contraventions. A public warning is rarely issued. Okay. Next slide, please. Once the recall has been classified, the depth of the recall also has to be determined. The depth of the recall refers to the extent to which the recall is being extended into the food distribution system. So the depth of a recall can be wholesale or warehouse level, retail level, which will also include or consider hotels, restaurants, and institutions, products that are distributed to that level, and also to the consumer level. When the recall depth is to the consumer level, a public warning is always issued. Next slide, thank you. The recalling firm is responsible for conducting the recall by notifying all their customers or consignees that they have supplied with the affected product and ensuring that its actions have been effective in removing the product from the marketplace. Product consignees have also the responsibility of removing the affected product from sale when they are requested to by their supplier. The OFSR develops the public warnings when required and is responsible for their distribution or dissemination. Next slide. So when a recall is implemented, public warnings are sent to the newswire as required. Email notifications are sent to listserv subscribers for all recalls that have a public warning, and as well for all allergen recalls. All Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 recalls are posted on the Government of Canada's Recalls and Safety Alerts website. Some recalls are also publicized on the CFIA social media accounts, including all recalls with a public warning and all allergen recalls regardless of class. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the Recalls and Safety Alerts page, which is our Government of Canada website where we post our Canadian food recall warnings. Translations for our websites are posted in Canada's official languages of English and French. Okay, next slide, please. The fifth step in the process is follow-up, where the CFIA verifies that the recall has been effective and works with the manufacturer or importer to ensure that the underlying problem is corrected. Next slide. Part of the follow-up step includes verification of the recall to assess its effectiveness. So CFIA provides guidance on the strategy developed by the recalling firm to recall products from sale and verifies the effectiveness of the recalling firm in completing and assessing its own recall. In addition, using a statistical sampling plan, the CFIA identifies the sample consignees to verify the recall's effectiveness. These we call recall effectiveness checks, and they verify that a subset of consignees at the appropriate depth, for example, at the retail level, have received notification of the recall and have taken appropriate action, which is usually removal, and also that they understand the action that has to be taken. On occasion, the CFIA may request the assistance of officials from provincial and territorial governments in conducting these recall effectiveness checks. We usually do this when there are a large number of accounts to check, we don't have enough resources for that, or when the provincial territorial governments may have more familiarity with the type of accounts that we need to conduct the checks at. If the recall is determined to be ineffective, the CFIA will request the recalling firm to reissue the recall and may take other risk mitigation actions. If a recalling firm is unwilling to remove the food from sale and appropriately dispose of it, the CFIA may seize and detain the food, recommend that a recall order be issued by the Minister of Health, issue a food safety warning, or work with the receiving consignees, distributors, and retailers and ask them to conduct a recall of the product. Next slide, please. The recalling firm provides an action plan for the disposition of the recalled product. CFIA verifies the plan. Some products may be salvageable. For example, allergens that were undeclared could be declared on the product by applying a new label. In some situations, the product that's affected can also be cooked and then incorporated into another food. Others may not be able to be corrected and may have to be discarded or returned to the country of origin if they were imported. Salvage product must be brought into compliance with Canadian legislation regulations if they are to be distributed again. CFIA monitors the recovery, reconciliation, and disposition of recalled product and any affected product in the company's control. Affected product includes product that was not distributed before the recall, as well as any product that was returned after the recall. Next slide, please. After recall product is removed from the marketplace, the CFIA continues to work with the processor, manufacturer, or importer as applicable to ensure that any problems that led to the recall are resolved. CFIA works with industry sectors or foreign countries to address broader issues that go beyond one company or sector. So this may involve the review of the Government of Canada's existing standards and policies relating to the management of certain risks. We also notify the appropriate food safety authority of product exported to or received from that country that has been recalled in Canada, and we do this using InfoSan emergency contact lists. And in some situations, we notify the InfoSan Secretariat of certain food recalls. Next slide. So here are some of the links to the CFIA's communication products. You can sign up for email notification subscription for food recalls and other food-related notifications. You can follow us on Twitter, join the CFIA community on Facebook, or follow us on Instagram. And that concludes our presentation. We'll welcome any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Janice, for these excellent presentation. I also learned a lot. I'm sure the people in the audience also learned a lot. And we do have time for questions. So I'm just going to go in the chat to see if we have any question. And yes, there's a question actually regarding sharing of the presentation. We will share them with IICA. We'll distribute them to people who attended today's webinar. So you will have access to the presentation. And also, I would like to offer you, if there is any follow-up question after today. Sometimes we need time to digest the information that is shared. So we would be pleased to answer those questions as well. You just have to maybe reach out to us directly or through your contacts at IICA, and we will gladly provide additional information. So maybe I see we have hands raised in the audience. Maybe we can start with those questions. So let's start with, I see Johnny Pachaguaya Rodriguez. I will give you now, you can, I think you will be able to ask your question to the presenters.
Johnny, you are able to talk now?
Sure. We do have a couple of questions also, so maybe we can go with Erica Guzman. You also have your hand raised. So the three people who had their hand raised in the presentation or in the audience, you have now the permission to unmute yourself. So I understand you need to click the little microphone button at the left bottom side. And I see Renier, you are now I think you are muted. So please go ahead with your question.
Yes, and hello everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, two questions. One, I put in the chat already. The speaker talked about three kinds of health: public health, animal health, and there was a third one. I did not understand that. What was the third one? And after that, I will come to my second question.
Plant health.
What health?
Plants.
Why?
Trees and plants and
Can you type it please for me? Can you
Okay.
type it for me in the chat?
That's plant health, salud de las plantas.
Oh, plant health, plant.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, you said something about returning the product back to the origin of imported country. Is that a regular process that is going on when products are imported? Because I can imagine if a product is have high risk, why should you send it back to the country instead of discarding it locally? That was a question. Thank you.
Okay, I can answer that question. So it would be in situations where it may be a violation in Canada, but it might not be a violation in another country. So there are some situations there where that could be an option. It's not necessarily something that's selected all the time, but it could be a situation. So of course, before the regulated party decides to exercise that option, they have to ensure that when they return that product, it meets all of the requirements of that country. It can't just go there. So if that country has similar requirements to Canada and it doesn't meet the Canadian requirements, then it wouldn't be permitted to go back. But there are situations where another country may accept a product. I hope that's clear.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I understand. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes.
And do we have, oh, I see a question here. So Johnny, Erica, and Mario, you have the permission to unmute yourself. So if you want to ask your question, please do go ahead. And I also looked at I see that we have questions in the chat as well. So I see that we have a question actually from Cofepris in Mexico. Once there has been a recall of a food product, what is the authority that will be in charge of issue, I just have the French word, sorry, that they issue penalties, or what is the process for those penalties and like the implementation and enforcement?
Okay, so when it comes to recall, as we mentioned, they're basically voluntary recalls where the company would take the action to remove the product from sale. In terms, generally, most of our recalls, it's a matter of taking that action and doing the correction. We generally do not issue, if you will, fines. I think that's what the person is asking about, the penalty. There is a longer process for that and review of that. If we feel the need, we could refer the file to our enforcement division that could look further into that. But from our perspective, what we are trying to achieve is to ensure that the product that's causing a problem is removed from sale. So we're only looking from the food safety aspect and not necessarily the enforcement part. That's what our group takes care of. But as I said, if need be, we could refer it for further enforcement action.
And I see, thank you, Adrienne. And I see a question also in the chat about the MRL webpage. I will put it in the chat. So Health Canada is setting up the MRLs for plaguicidas, for for pest control products and for food as well. I will put the link in the chat so you have access to it, and we'll add also the links of CFIA's webpage where you have all this information, and there's also detailed information on recalls. Those links, you will also find them in the presentation on the last page, but you can have them for easy access here. I see. For now, I think that's the question. Okay, I see another question here from Mauricio. What is the most common type of recall on food products that are exported to your country? So Adrienne or Janet?
I did not run some statistics right before, but what I can say is that usually I would say it's going to be in the category of allergens. We have a lot of undeclared allergens, and that's usually because Canada's top 10 priority allergens are different from other countries. It is based on kind of our population and what has occurred here. So when products are imported, they may not see necessarily a concern. For example, some countries don't see a concern with peanuts to the level that we do. And they may not be familiar as well with the terminology used in English and French for those allergens. So there might be errors in the labels that way as well. So we tend to have a lot of allergen recalls, I would say. Janice is agreeing, I think so.
Yes, agreed. Agreed. That would have been my response as well. without running a report and looking at stats. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Here, there's a question, where can we have a look at the recalls for fresh produce for pest control products? And I have just put in the chat the link also to the MRL for pest control products, so people have access to it. But for, I don't know if Adrienne or Janice, you want to comment on that? Where can we have a look at?
All our recalls are posted on the recalls and safety alerts page, regardless of the area of concern. In terms of pest control products, I don't know if we've had many in the last little while, but all recalls are posted there, class 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you, Adrienne. Also a quick question on where the methodologies for sampling in food products can be found. Do we have this information on our website? Any guidance you can provide on that?
I can answer in terms of, so methodology for taking samples. I think it depends. There's probably industry guidance, Janice, correct? There would be some.
Yeah. I'm not sure about industry guidance. Probably there is on our website. We can look that up and add it to the chat.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure our internal guidance, like for inspectors on sampling, is also posted externally. So
Yeah.
there should be information on our website for sampling.
Yeah, so I think it might be, like, for example, that coming off the top of my head, if we were talking about listeria controls in products, there would be some guidance for industry on listeria controls and how to take samples and do their own monitoring of the food product. And then I just wanted to say, in terms of the methodologies used to test a product, so different types of methodology, like how do we conduct analysis of food product for listeria monocytogenes or something along the lines of that, that is under Health Canada, and they have a whole compendium of analytical methods. It used to be posted on their website. I think you have to request specific ones from them now, but that's under Health Canada. We generally use the majority of their methodologies to test food products. So I'm trying to go and answer the question at kind of what I think is what they're asking, but if further clarification is needed, just let us know, if I've misunderstood the question. Pedro, you're not loud enough.
Now it should be better now.
Yes.
Perfect. No, just I wanted to add it on just based, on the translation that I can see on the chat. I think I just wanted, to elaborate a bit of the Health Canada compendium method. I think you just covered it. Marie-Pierre, I think we can share after, some links for you that you might be able to share with the IICA, where you can have all the methodologies that we use, because Health Canada set up those methodologies, and we use that for enforcement purposes. So you can see, the different tests that we use at the agency. So yeah, I think you covered that one, and I think that would be, the answer.
And actually, that's a very good point, Pedro. When I will share the presentation with IICA, we can send also key links for sharing along with those presentations. Also, I see here some questions in the chat. So this is a very interesting question. I would call it a $10,000 question. So for the 5-step process, like usually what would be the timelines, or like in general? And I know it will depend on each case, each situation, but maybe that's interesting to just hear a little bit more about that, to have an idea of what it represents really, or what it could represent.
Okay, so I'll tackle this question, Janet. It does depend on the type of risk. High risk, or what we call high priority issues, will take precedence over others that are more of a normal priority. An example of a high priority issue might be an outbreak situation, foodborne illness outbreak, or any illness or allergic reaction. And a normal priority issue might be something like, oh, I had one off the top. Some insects, and an insect found in a piece of bread or something, which is, a lower priority. It's not likely to cause any harm. It's been baked into the bread. So if we're thinking about any pathogens held by that, associated with that insect, that would have been controlled by the baking. So based on the priority, we follow up on our situations. So just to give you kind of a rough example, our first step is, if we started as a complaint, we have to follow up with the complainant. So we receive the complaint, we would initiate contact with them within 24 hours to gather details about their complaint and identify the product. And then once we have that information, if we need to obtain the complainant sample, we would try to get it as soon as possible. If it's possible, we could get it the next day. After we pick up the sample from the complainant, we could go to the retail store where they purchased it that same day, because it's usually close by. Most people shop, at supermarkets close to where they live. And we might go to that retail store and follow up. Have you had any complaints? We might look at picking up closed, unopened samples of the product for further testing. And then also identify, like, is it a manufactured product made in Canada, or is it imported? We have to follow up with the respective regulated party, the manufacturer or the importer. If they are available and everything works out well in terms of timing, hopefully we could do that, say, for example, the next day. So information gathering, we go to the manufacturer or the importer, look at their records, do interviews with their staff, look around, do an inspection. That could take a whole day there. And ensure that we have all of the information for requesting a risk assessment. And so then that information that the inspectors collected would go to the Office of Food Safety and Recall. And then we would review that information, look for any gaps in that information, and we would request a health risk assessment from Health Canada. They have time standards, as I said. I don't know if those are like exactly public, they're kind of more internal, but obviously, again, the higher the priority, the shorter the turnaround time for them to provide the assessment to us. And then usually when we get the assessment back from Health Canada, let's use a high risk situation, health risk 1 or class 1 situation. As soon as we get that back, we usually, within the Office of Food Safety and Recall, we make a decision, recall or not, what level, and we aim to issue any public warning. If it's class 1, it would be a public warning within 24 hours. So that kind of gives you roughly a timeline of how it go, but each step, there could be challenges that would slow down the process. One could be even when you get to the recall stage, you might have challenges with the recalling for a regulated party. They may not understand. We may have to take some time to explain things to them, that type of thing. So that's just the best estimate, but it's very hard for us to give a exact amount of time.
Thank you, Adrienne. One question that we have also in the case of a recall, who is in charge of the relabeling of the product? If the product is put is further distributed or something when there's a recall on something that is not a major cause, so who is in charge of relabeling it?
I can answer that, I guess, Adrian. It's the operator's responsibility, or the regulated party is responsible for relabeling, not the CFIA.
Yeah,
That's
so
where you're
just
getting at.
elaborate a little bit. They have to make sure that the label, when they make the changes, they create a label, they ensure that it is in compliance before they can apply it. CFIA may review it, but generally they should be ensuring that they followed all the regulations, and if need be, they can have a consultant help them where, you know, but before they apply it, we may take a quick look to make sure there aren't going to be any more recalls or errors.
And sometimes that can be just a sticker, right? If they're, instead of replacing the entire label, it may just be a sticker that goes on top of the existing label.
I wanted to mention, Marie-Pierre, if I may. I get these questions at IICA Canada many times from the rest of the Americas, because they see Canada as a great opportunity to export their product to a large market in the Americas, including the US, where the purchasing power here is interesting. So the number one question that the importer, the buyer, the Canadian here, to get that purchasing order, the first thing they're going to ask you is about certification. It's all about food safety. If you're not certified as an exporter, if you'd like at minimum as HACCP, but really GFSI, Global Food Safety Institute, like BRC and SQF and others, those are the quality schemes that they're looking for in this market. So when I offer training in Colombia or elsewhere, when I get these questions, they're going to hang up on, because if you're not certified, there's no discussion. You have to be certified for export to access this market. So what you're learning about food recalls here is really important, because you have to comply. And when they talk about labels, there's also, and a big reminder here, bilingual, French and English, because some export the product and they forget French often. And allergies is a big one. And you heard Adrian speak to allergies. It's many Canadians, it's, you know, peanuts, eggs to seafood. There's a lots of soja, sesame, etc. So you make sure those are listed, and there are ways of listing them. Like it contains product, like the wording is really important. So after food safety, the main things that you want to focus on in terms of exporting to the Canada is reliability of supply. They don't want to buy one container every 6 months. They want to buy 2 containers every week, because that's how big the market is here. And so after that, you can look at the quality of the product, the taste, the flavor, the texture, the et cetera, et cetera. And then price is negotiated. But then there are other factors. Well, food safety is number one. I just wanted to highlight that as the most important factor for the Canadian buyer here. And just to clarify, we have like several hundred people who registered for this webinar. We will send out to all of you an email with links to the presentations in English and Spanish, and to the webinar on the IICA Canada page, to the email that you use to register for this webinar. You don't need to be posting them in the chat. We will reach out to you. If you registered for this, we will send them out. And then once it's posted to the webinar is posted to the IICA Canada page. Otherwise, you saw in the chat, you can email the CFIA directly. Marie-Pierre has added her email address in there for that kind of technical expertise from Canada. And those are the two main themes I wanted to share with the audience today. Marie-Pierre, over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Charles. And yes, actually, I think I just sent my email to a restricted group of people. I'll add it to the chat. And yes, we are always happy to collaborate, to provide more information on these kind of topics. And I also would like to mention that with IICA, we do collaborate very often on those webinars. So today we've had a webinar, a workshop on food recall and investigation, but we've had one a couple of months ago on allergens. We also have one coming up at the end of March on the establishment-based risk assessment model, the ERA model. So this is something we do on a regular basis. And when you have a particular interest for a topic on which we could collaborate, please let your colleagues from IICA know, because we're always happy to do these kind of activities. It is virtual. I would love to be somewhere in Latin America today to present this in person. However, for now, we're using the virtual tool, which also allows us to reach a very interesting sized audience. So just a note on that, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to look into options or opportunities to collaborate at the technical level. I see 3 hands raised. I don't know if they are what we call legacy hands, that they are just there, but the questions have been responded. So maybe Johnny, Erica, or Renier, if you do have a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, I have a question, Rainier from Suriname. The IICA authority just mentioned HACCP. My question, is HACCP still international accepted?
So Adrienne or Janice?
Ooh, I don't want to say yes or no. I would say yeah. I think it's still used internationally. In Canada, with the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, we now have. I mean, it's a premise of HACCP embedded in the regulations themselves. So our preventive control inspections or requirements under the regulations require companies to have preventive controls in place, which is typically equivalent, I would say, to HACCP. I can also put a link in the chat that actually talks specifically about this and our regulations and how you can meet the requirements. And it talks about equivalency with, I'm not sure if HACCP is actually mentioned in there or not, but I can put that in the chat for you. Hopefully that answers the question.
So that answer is not really clear to me. So my point is, let me say that we want to export a product from Suriname to international country, and we are only HACCP certificated. Will our product be accepted on the basis of HACCP, or will it be rejected, or need it be more certified?
Maybe I would like to add a little bit of Janice's response. One of the beauty, I could say, of our new regulation is that they are outcome-based regulations. So these really come into the exporting entity, and actually, you know, and in our side would be our importer, licensed importer as well, just to demonstrate that the level of safety of the product they are importing into Canada meet our regulations. So saying that is, is the company has a program and has the preventive control in place, the pretty much certified Canadian requirements, wouldn't be an issue for that exporting country.
Oh, problem. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pedro, for the additional information. I see one last question in the chat. Maybe we can conclude with this one. So with respect to the certification for food safety, which element is preferred by the CFIA? Is certification by a government official or by a private or commercial entity, for instance, Primus?
I'll take a stab at this. I don't think we would have a preference either way. And I think if you're exporting to Canada, you just have to make sure that your product is meeting requirements, Canadian requirements. I don't think there's a requirement for product. Is it product to be certified? I'm guessing they're talking about an actual food product to be certified. Yeah, I don't think there's, unless, I mean, if it's something like organic, you know, and you're going to label your product as organic, then you have to make sure that it meets the Canadian requirements. So I don't know, Pedro, if you have anything more to add.
Yes, sorry, I didn't understand well the question. However, I agree with you. As long the Canadian requirements are met and the product is safe, that would be, no, we don't certify product. Just we just ensure, that the product coming to our country, they meet our requirement. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think that, that may be more relevant, and maybe that's where the question is coming from. It may be more relevant for other countries, but for us, we don't necessarily have a list of approved certification bodies that we accept. The only time we have anything where, if you will, we're kind of more specific about is when it comes to laboratory results. So we would like to see that it comes from a lab that uses equivalent methods to the ones that we used, and that they're actually accredited for using those methods. Or if the product comes into Canada, so it's exported to Canada and the importer decides to submit it for testing upon arrival, again, that they're using a lab that is certified or accredited, accredited by the, at least two that I'm aware of, accreditation or laboratories, networks that we support or agree with, or have used, and which our labs would be also accredited under. So, but generally, no, we're not very, I haven't seen anything specific that says, we accept accreditation from all of these entities. We just really, want them to comply with the regulations.
Thank you, Adrienne. I think that's all I can see. There's a question still on ISO standard in the chat. So is it enough for the accreditation ISO 17025?
I think that's the same answer as we just gave.
Yeah.
Is that we're not looking at accreditation, but I think I can add maybe a little bit of context. So if within Canada, I'm doing an inspection of an importer, so you guys are the exporter, but we're looking at the company that's importing the product, then we're going to look at what controls do they have in place? Like, what are they asking of their supplier? So if that importer in Canada can say, oh, my supplier has this ISO certification or this or that, then, it's up to the importer to show to us that meets regulatory requirements, or it's equivalent to what we would expect here. So I think kind of a reverse way of sharing that information, but it's how we would look at it in Canada. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much. So we have one last question from Rainier, and then we will conclude this webinar for today. So Rainier, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Last question, yes. Can I say when I am HACCP certified, can I say on international level, I am HACCP certified, so my product is safe? Can I make that direct conclusion, or can I put that direct relation, yes or no? Thank you.
I'm not sure how to answer that question, but I think just because you're HACCP certified, I mean, we've had recalls with companies that have HACCP certification, so it's not going to eliminate the problem entirely, I don't think, but I think you're on the right step if you're using HACCP and it's applied properly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
And I
Jen.
will suggest maybe, Marie-Pierre, we have our international group, export import. So they are really, a specific question about requirement. Obviously, they have the area of expertise that they can, provide further more information than what we can provide today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pedro.
Oh.
Those are, yes.
I was going to say for Canada, I mean, if Surinam's looking to export to Guyana or to the Caribbean, each market is different. They're not the U.S. food safety system is different from Canada's. So the HACCP, you'll have to speak to, if you work with the IICA local office in Suriname, they have a food safety division. You can ask them too for advice. We have a dedicated food safety team out of headquarters in Costa Rica as well. But these questions, like the HACCP for many, that's why I mentioned Global Food Safety Initiative, because most of the quality schemes are much more stringent than simply HACCP. It's not enough. And I did want to thank most people. So we're ending the session, and from an IICA standpoint, this has been fantastic. We've enjoyed the participation. I think we hit 180 participants at one point. Very popular topic, often this is. And I invite everyone to come back on March 29th, when we partner once again and co-host another webinar with the CFIA. We'll be putting out the invitations and the theme and brochures and promoting it in a couple of weeks. Meantime, I'll let CFIA and Marie-Pierre provide some closing remarks, but from our end, stay safe, everyone. It's been very enjoyable. The webinars will be posted in coming days, and you'll be getting an email from the IICA team here afterwards. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Jean-Charles. I will be brief. I think I would like to start by thanking the presenters today who did an incredible job in presenting this very interesting topic. And yes, the number of people attending today represents the high interest in the Canadian system for food recalls and investigation. So thank you, Adrienne and Janice. Thank you also, Pedro, for the support in the Q&A's period. I would like to also say a big thanks to the interpreters who did a great job today in interpreting and allowing the information to be shared in both languages. That's very much appreciated. And of course, I would like to thank IICA, Jean-Charles, Gloria, Camino for all this collaboration that we have on a regular basis with IICA. As I mentioned at the beginning, that's my unit is in charge of coordinating technical assistance, but by working with IICA Canada, we actually reach a much broader audience. We reach a lot of countries with who we don't normally work, so it's nice to have the opportunity to collaborate on these topics. Any suggestion, any topics you would like to hear about from Canada, please communicate through your IICA representative or your IICA contacts. Also, you can also write directly to me, and we can look into the opportunities of collaborating together. So I hope the information that we shared today will be useful, and we will be in touch in another webinar or in another opportunity, I am sure. So take care, everybody. Thank you for your presence today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.